What's up everyone, it's a Knife Style here, and today I'm going to be doing a testing demonstration showing you guys a comparison between knives that are thick behind the edge like this Protech SBR, and the measurements are on the screen right now. I measured at the base and the belly, or the base, the middle, and the tip of each knife, and then this, the Microtech LUDT. So this is a very thin knife behind the edge, while this one is a very thick knife behind the edge. So I'm going to show you guys how they differ in actual cutting. Now, this will not be an edge retention test, I want to assure that. I will just be showing them cutting side by side. I will show different methods of sharpening and how they sharpen up and how long they stay sharp, and I will also strop them up, and I will be cutting on cardboard and a little bit of wood. So I'm really just going to show you guys how these differ and how a knife that is really thin behind the edge, how much better it cuts than a knife that is thick behind the edge. So let's get right into the unknown variables of this experiment that I'm doing. So one difference between these two knives is the stock thickness on the Microtech LUDT is a tiny bit thinner than on the Protech, so technically it should slide through materials a little bit more, and the blade is the grind has a lot more chance to drop down than the Protech. So with the Protech there will be more resistance with this flat here and with the stock thickness than the Microtech LUDT. Another really obvious unknown variable is the steels and HRCs between this. Now, they will obviously sharpen up differently because this is 204P on my Microtech LUDT, and on my Protech SBR it runs S35VN. They also have different HRCs. I'm pretty sure Microtech runs their things pretty soft, while Protech, I'm pretty sure they have solid HRCs, and so that will differ in sharpening time and stropping time, and basically how long it cuts overall, and maybe how fast it could dull compared to the other knives. Another obvious unknown variable is the spec difference between these two knives. The Protech SBR has a shorter blade than the Microtech LUDT, so sometimes when it shows cuts, I will not make it all the way through a strip of cardboard with the Protech when I do it with the Microtech. But what I want you guys to pay attention to, and what I will point out, is how well it does that certain cut. A lot of times I'll run out of blade length, while sometimes I can just push cut through it if it's sharp enough and if it's thin enough. And another unknown variable is the blade shape. They're both drop point blade shapes. The Protech has a little bit more of a belly to it than the LUDT. I maybe call the LUDT more of a spear point. Sorry, I'm trying to get that to focus right now. I'm in a little bit of a weirder setting. But anyway, that is just another one of the unknown variables. Before you comment down below, I just want to clear it up that these are both saber ground knives, so there is no hollow grind on either one of these knives, so there shouldn't really be a difference between these except the length of the grind, its ability to drop down. Like I already mentioned before, the SBR will have more resistance with that larger flat and that little bit of a thicker stock. Another variable could be the ergonomics of the knife, because sometimes when I'm cutting through cardboard or cutting through wood, if the knife is more comfortable in my hand, I will be able to put more force on it without it digging into my hand and hurting a little bit more. Now, luckily, both these knives are very comfortable in hand, but I will have to give the edge to the LUDT that it actually is a lot more comfortable in the hand. One possible unknown variable is that I will be using a freehand sharpening system. I will be using the WorkSharp guided sharpening system, but I will have it in the locked mode so that it is basically just a freehand system. And I do not have a KME sharpening both these knives at the same degree, at the same angle per side, and so I'm sorry, I just can't be that specific with that. And a knife that is much thinner behind the edge can take a much lower angle on the sharpening, because if I sharpen this knife at like 11 thousandths beyond the edge, or 11 degrees per side, or 12 degrees per side, it wouldn't look that off. The secondary bevel would still look pretty average, while if I sharpen my Protech at that, the secondary bevel would probably be up to here on the knife. And so I can't do that both the same. That is one advantage to a knife that is thinner behind the edge. And right before I get into testing, I just want to say that there will probably be many more unknown variables, and if you find any, please call me out in the comment section. I would love to be able to improve on my testing abilities. I know that I'm not very good at this. This is my first time doing something like that, but it is not an edge retention test. I will make sure of that one. So as you might have been able to tell from that last clip, knives that are thicker behind the edge do sharpen up fine, but they don't sharpen up as good as knives that are super thin behind the edge. And that's just how it is. It is just thinner, slicier, and it will cut better through paper. Both of these knives can shave arm hair very well. This one can actually do it better though. It's just how it is. Knives that are thinner behind the edge can cut, but don't get me wrong, the Protech SBR can still cut flesh because I was cleaning this off with a paper towel and my finger slipped. So yeah, it's still, both of these knives are still very sharp. So now I'm starting with my testing. I'm doing vertical cut tests just straight down, and as you guys can see here, the SBR is really struggling. Don't get me wrong, I can do it, and by the use of that belly, it still will get the job done. It just isn't doing it to my liking. But now I'm switching to the LUDT, and it is just gliding a lot better through that cardboard and just doing a good job. So now I'm switching to kind of a diagonal cut test. Sometimes I just do this just to test it. And as I mentioned before, a variable of it would be the blade shape of the SBR. But I want you guys to keep in mind that I try and push cut almost all of these cuts. But with the force in my hand, it sometimes just results in me slipping out of the way. And so if I could push cut through this cardboard very well with the SBR, it would be doing a lot better. As I had to do that long cut just there, I had to push cut a lot of it, and that's where it really struggled, while the LUDT did a very good job and sliced through that double layered cardboard like it was phone book paper. So now I'm doing a push straight down cut onto this cardboard with the SBR, and it did a lot better than what you first saw. And so yeah, keep that in mind too, but the LUDT is really just showing it up here. So this paper test I'm about to show really shows the damage that the SBR took during this cut test, and it still is a fine working edge. It's just not all that good compared to the LUDT, which is still just as good as normal, or it is a little bit worse, but it's still great. I moved back on again to the vertical cut test, and I just want to state that I was using the belly a lot in these cut tests. I wasn't just using a flat and doing a push cut because I'm not really doing an edge retention test. I'm just seeing how the knives stack up and how they actually slice it better. And so as you can see, the LUDT did it fine. The SBR was struggling to get a bite with this. And I did have to use a lot more force to cut it, and as you guys can see there, the cardboard binded on me and it did not slice through like a normal cut, and so the SBR just wasn't impressing me very much, and that's obviously because it's 26 thousandths beyond the edge, while the LUDT is a super thin slicer and cuts that cardboard with ease. So now I want to show you guys, after a little bit of stropping, how the edge actually comes back to restore. So I think that it was about 10 or 15 strokes on each side with each knife. I can't really remember, but it was around in that area. So as you guys can see on the SBR, it actually restored it very nicely, and it was back into a good edge that I would be comfortable to use in my everyday life. So now on to the LUDT stropping, and I did hold this at a lower angle because it's a lower secondary bevel, and it just shredded through that paper. The wood that I'm using for this cut test is oak, so it's very strong and it's a very tough wood, and it's really nice to see how well that these knives will do on it. And you can't really tell from this angle, but the LUDT really just bites in deep to that wood, while the SBR really just scrapes the surface, and the LUDT really had much more of an impact than the SBR. Sorry for my cut test being off camera in a couple seconds, but I'm just showing on paper what the wood did to the Protech SBR, and it was still in pretty good condition, kind of like how it was after a stropping, but it wasn't as good as it was right after I stropped it, so it did take a little abuse. But now for the LUDT, and it is just like nothing ever happened to it, and is in great condition right now. I did a couple more cuts with the Protech SBR just to show that it's also in good condition too. So here's a frozen picture of the cuts the LUDT did, and it really bit deep into that oak. And now that for the SBR, it really just scraped the surface and didn't do much at all to it. So now time to dull the knives and test them after that. This is on the side of a 1K grit whetstone, and you guys better be happy that I did a voiceover because that was really cringy to my ears, and it was about 4 strokes on each knife. A full stroke on the corner, so it was really biting into that apex, really dulling the blade. So I'm testing this on catalog paper here, and that's easier to cut than phone book paper. And both these knives, the apex cannot even bite into the paper at all, and it's really just bending the paper out of the way and just kind of tearing at it. And yeah, if I poke the knife through and then cut, the LUDT can do it fine, and the SBR can do it okay. It's just not the best. Here's a quick paper test to show all those suspicious people that I did not sharp anything over the cut. And the LUDT, even though it's completely dull, it can still cut this cardboard just because how thin it is. But the SBR cannot make this stuff budge, and I was physically grunting on that cut. It was just super hard to do. And the LUDT on these diagonal cuts also performs much better. I had to use an extra hand on that SBR. It was just really hard to cut that cardboard. The reason I only used a 1K Waterstone to dull my knives with is because I didn't want to put bad chips in the blade, maybe with a low grit whetstone, but I'm seeing if I can strop back the LUDT right now. And as you can see on paper, it is not the best, but it still is back to a working edge, and it can still get the job done with any task that you need it to do on a regular basis. Now I'm stropping the SBR back, and as you're about to see in a little bit, it isn't just not very good, and it's still not restored, not really even close. I tried to strop the Microtech even more, but there wasn't really much of a difference. I couldn't shave hair, but I could still slice paper. Here's a time lapse of me sharpening the Microtech, and this is a 320 grit stone, and I really just wanted to see how much of a toothy edge that could be put on this 204P. With addition of the thin knife behind the edge, I wanted to see what it would do. I knocked off the burr by just rubbing it on a piece of wood, just dragging the knife through it, so I didn't use a strop at all, and it still got restored to that good of slicing paper. This footage you're seeing right here is after some more cardboard cutting, but I lost the footage because I showed my address on the cardboard. But as you can see here, it still just works great, and even with that 320 grit edge, it is still a fine cutter. I sharpened the Protech on the same 320 grit stone, but it actually should have done better because I knocked the burr off with a ceramic rod, which would be more efficient than knocking it off with a piece of wood. And on the cardboard, the Protech still just kind of tore through it, and it wasn't the best. And on paper, it is not a very clean cut. And then once I pull out my Microtech here, it really just shows how much better it could have been if it was thinner. I say some things in the next part that are true, but kind of confusing. What I'm trying to say is that edge geometry is not just the thickness behind the edge. Edge geometry is the stock thickness mixed with the grind height, mixed with the thickness behind the edge. And in order to see how a knife performs with cutting tasks, it's not just the thickness behind the edge. So, if I had something that I could say to you guys that you could take away and remember for the rest of your life from this video, it's that knives are thin behind the edge, do most all of everyday carry normal tasks better than knives that are thick behind the edge. With the cutting test that you saw me do, it was mostly cardboard, and then I did some cutting tests on that wood. And the knives are the Microtech LUDT did so much better than the Protech in almost everything. It got sharper, it sharpened up faster, and it sharpened up better. And even on a low 320 grit, it cut way better than the Protech SBR on that low grit. A lot of times, the reason I wasn't able to record the actual audio of this, so that's why it was more of a voiceover. But if you guys could have heard the actual audio, you would have heard me literally grunting when I would cut with this Protech SBR. Not that this is a bad knife or anything, but it's just very thick behind the edge, and it has a pretty bad geometry here because it's got kind of a thick stock for its size. It doesn't have much room to drop down, and it's just kind of a wedge through all that cardboard. While the SBR sometimes, or no, not the SBR, the LUDT sometimes feels like I can just slice through cardboard, holding it like this and just slicing through it all the way like that. And so that's going to end it for this video. I hope you guys now know why I care about edge geometry so much, just because it makes everything easier and everything better, and it just, I feel like for the things that I use my knives for, a knife that is thinner behind the edge is 100% better than a knife that is thicker behind the edge. So, and just for a reference, I say this all the time, but this, as you guys saw in that last clip, I measured this somewhere in this area at about 8.5 thousandths behind the edge. That is almost half the size of a Spyderco, or about the average Spyderco is 19 to 20 thousandths behind the edge. And so yeah, that really shows you that this knife is a super thin knife and is a super good knife at all the cuts that I need to do. And even when you do harder use tasks that are, it's like cutting wood, like I showed you guys, I do that a lot when I do hard use tasks. A knife this there behind the edge will do much better. Now if you are chopping nails with your knives, a knife that is thicker is going to do that best, but sometimes you got to ask yourself, are you really wanting this size of a knife for its thick and beefy geometry, or should you just gravitate towards a fixed blade, or maybe even a more specific tool like an axe or whatever? I don't know. But that's gonna do it for the video. Thank you all for watching this. If you want to see more videos like this is my first sort of testing video that I've ever done. But thanks for watching. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you guys in the next one.